Hi friends, welcome back to Mule-4 series of learning videos. I am Siva.thankamanee, an integration technical architect. While we work with batch processing and handling huge amount of records, there might be sometimes an error while processing some records in between. So in this video, we are going to see how to develop batch process, and also we are going to see how to handle those failed records and isolate them separately. Let's get started. I have a flow created already under the Mule-4 project, and this is my flow, and which is completed with all the setup, which I'm going to explain now in detail. So the objective here is to send the batch. I mean, normally we get the batch processing trigger by either CSV file or which is placed as a file or FTP. But for the demonstration purpose, I have HTTP listener. You can further replace into your own requirements to receive this file. So we are receiving this array of values, and we are going to process each record one by one. In my case, it's simply a number which is processed in the batch step. And so we are going to have this grouped into batch of 3 records each. And then we are going to transform those data into a single JSON, and we are going to write it into a file. So each batch will be written as a file separately. I mean, you can assume this process as your API, which is processing this as batch by batch in your own project requirements. So I'm only showing the demo and conceptualizing the batch processing here. So let's see how this is done all together. So there is a HTTP listener, and I'm logging the initial payload. And there is a batch job created. So this is a batch job scope. You can do that by using this batch job component. And so I'm clicking here. And the total batch block size will be 100 here. And so even if it is thousands of records processed, it's going to take block by block, which is 100 by 100. So each batch is processed into the batch step, and batch step can be added by means of this batch step component, which I have done here. And so when we take and process 100 records, you might need to split them and process them according to your API capabilities, or based on which system you are going to write into. So for the simplicity, I have created the batch aggregator, which helps to split these individual block into group of 3 records. So let's see one by one the configuration. So first let's see the batch step. Batch step is configured as is, and there is no change required. And go to the batch aggregator. So we have the batch aggregator. You can drag and drop by using this batch aggregator component. And after dragging and dropping, you will get the aggregator scope, where you can place this set of components. So I have attempted to log the payload just to show you how it's aggregated. So normally it gets aggregated as an array, which you can transform, and then you can iterate by using map and to produce your own required format. And finally, we are writing that one single aggregated batch into a file to show you how many batches are created and what are the outputs for each file. And finally, we have a transform message to indicate the batch completed successfully. So normally we don't do that, or we don't do batch processing when we introduce HTTP listener. But please remember, and you need to replace this HTTP listener into your own either FTP or file processing according to the actual project requirements. Since the objective of this video is to demonstrate how to handle error records, because To set up the batch processing, I have already created a video and I can put the link down here and you can refer it later. But in this video, we are focusing on how to extract, isolate, and process those error records, or managing it or maintaining it, persisting it somewhere so that you can retrieve the failed records later. So that is what our demo is. So I'm going to take one functionality for the demonstration use case. So which I'm going to deal with integers, and I'm going to divide it by 2 because we are going to find half of each number in a batch. So I have selected this feature because when you divide it by 2, it will result in error in case if it is not an integer and we are supplying some string value. So we will deliberately place one string and then see how this error can be, or error handling can be designed. So we have not handled the error, so I'm going to show you what is the disadvantage we are facing down here. And so let's run this project, and I'll show you what we are doing here. So we are displaying the half of the payload and we are just dividing it by 2, and this is the logger, and the same we are setting it as a payload so that we can handle it as a batch and then put it into the file. So let's run this first with a positive, and I have the output folder here. It's empty now, and my input is going to be 6 integers, so which is going to be grouped into 2 batches of 3 records each. And let's run and see what the output is. So I have completed, and the batch completed successfully is the response received, and this is the output folder. So in order to find out the group, I have added the timestamp into the file name, and you may carefully note that this batch, since the batch size is 3, it can be completed quite quickly, and one of the files could be lost. So you need to be very careful to handle when files are handling so quickly, although you have hour, minute and second. So it can be processed even within a single second, so you might lose some data. So to avoid that, I have added some random numbers attached so that every time it creates a new file. So this is one of the techniques you can learn to avoid the timestamp related loss. So let's open and see what's there. And we should see half of each number. We close it. It's then we will see the next one, and it's 1, 2, 3. So it's again half of each number we handled. So now what we are going to see is we are going to deliberately introduce error and see what's happening. So let's delete this, and instead of 12 I'm going to give invalid, which is a string, and we can't find the half of this number. Let's see what happens. The batch completed successfully. So that's the tricky part here. You won't result in an error because it will go to the error handling and it will go to the next record. So let's see what happens. So these are the 2 files which I have resulted in the file output. Let's open and see. So we have 2 records which shows that we are missing 1 record, and we will see this record, and 1, 2, 3. So we are missing 1 record here, and let's see the console logs. You can scroll down and see there should be an error. See here, cannot convert a string to a number, and then it resulted in an error. It's broken, but the batch executed the next element and then completed to the end. But we lost this number or the data. So always remember, when you are doing the batch processing or when you are designing an application, always you should ensure that no data is lost, or at least we should be able to trace the error and the root cause, and it should never go unnoticed. So let's see how to handle this. So I'm going to give try catch and then drag and drop, and we are going to place this set payload and log here, because this is what we are going to try, and this is going to result in an error. So under the error handling, and we are going to choose on error continue, because we should not abruptly end the flow, but rather we need to have a controlled way of handling this error records. So we are choosing on error continue, and the best practice is here to not to process the error records here, because error records should always be handled in an asynchronous way, and it should not disturb the flow that continues for the valid records. So the design technique here is to choose queue, or now here for demonstration purpose I'm going to use VM, and I'm going to choose publish. So once you publish, you can later on handle and the failed records, and by using listener you can retrieve them and process accordingly, which we are going to see. So let's configure queue, and it's a simple configuration, and you can see what is there. So it's created, and we are giving the queue name as error queue, which we are going to give here. So we used error queue here, and then we persisted that failed records. So when by this design, what happens is when the particular record fails, it goes to the error handling, and then it preserves the data for our later error handling purposes. So that's the key here. And it's always important to handle these asynchronously, so that the main flow doesn't need to wait while processing error records. Errors are errors, and you don't need to pay attention for error records. But the priority is to only persist them somewhere for later reference. So I'm going to use VM listener here, and this listener has to be configured with exactly the same queue name where we published. So I'm using, so we are using the same VM configuration which we used for publishing, and now we are using the same queue name so that we can retrieve the records placed into the error queue. So what we are going to do is here, and we are going to copy this, and this is to create a file name with current timestamp format, and we are attaching this random number. I will place this particular detail in the description below. So we are going to choose file and drag and drop right component, and you can place the same file configuration, and we are going to place name this as error, so that we can differentiate between success and error. And so we completed, and we isolated the error records and then handled them separately and asynchronously, and writing it into the separate file name. So let's save this, and I think the flow is restarted. So now let's see what happens with the invalid record. Now let's go and delete the existing files. So it's completed, and let's see. Now you can see here there are 2 success files and 1 error file. Let's open and see what's the error record. So the invalid record is isolated as invalid, and let's see the content of success. The content of success records remain to be the same without any updates in the structure. So here the important point to understand here is there are so many takeaways from this. So the first one is you need to set up the batch step with the batch size properly, and within the batch step you don't deal with again huge number of records, and then you can further split it with aggregator size accordingly. And when file write, we have learned we need to add random number, or you need to choose your own technique to avoid writing within the quick succession because the processing speed might be faster. So both records might fall under the same second. So if otherwise you can add milliseconds also, but there is a chance there are multiple records fall under the same milliseconds as well. So that is one takeaway, and the important takeaway is I need to repeat here. You can follow me carefully. So whenever error happens, you should not disrupt the flow that's happening for valid records, because valid record might carry some critical orders which needs to be processed, which should not be delayed. And error records will always be failed, and you don't need to worry about too much and focus only on maintaining it somewhere for future reference purposes. So normally what happens is we process the error handler by writing these isolated records into the database, or creating an alert in the Cloud Hub so that somebody gets attention when some records are failed. So what if this failed record is containing some critical order, say order for say $10,000 or $1 million. So in that case also you may not know what error got failed or what transaction got failed. So here you can introduce Cloud Hub alert and write an alert, so that when there are some particular error scenario happened, the customer support team will get an email alert so that they can go look into the failed record and see what error is, and then they may call the customer to find out what is the intention, and then process the failed records accordingly. So that's it in this video, and hope you have found this video useful and you liked it. So if so, please hit the like button and subscribe my channel so I can come up with more useful videos in the future. Thanks for watching. Bye.